just get started. There we go. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Hello, hello, hello. What's it like where you're at? Just as we are getting ready to get started, and we know we've got a few more people who will be joining us, what's it like where you're at? Where I'm at, and you can do the math on this, it was minus 25 with the wind chill this morning, minus 25 centigrade. Yeah, Peggy says cold. Peggy lives a couple hours away from me, and yeah, it is dang cold. I was supposed to go for a long run this morning. Guess what? It won't happen until after lunch because it's supposed to warm up to minus 6 centigrade, which is actually fairly nice running weather. So I'm hoping that wherever you are not freezing to death, and that you're comfortable and that you're warm. And if you're somewhere where it's cold, I hope your furnace is working. Okay, so let's dive in. You know, as we do this again, what we're going to find is that there are lots of different schools of thought when it comes to iridology. And whether you've studied with Dr. Bernard Jensen or one of his students, or Ellen Tart Jensen, or Dr. Morse, or Dr. Pesic, or whether you've already learned constitutional iridology, or maybe you've learned Rayid, or behavioral, or emotional. There's so many different ones. They all use different languages. Today, we are really going to focus on the contrast between North American Jensenian and the constitutional style. We know that iridology has been evolving for nearly 200 years in its current iteration. And our understanding of iridology has undergone massive changes, and there's been research that's been happening, and it's moved us forward, or at least it's moved some of us forward. Those of us who have opted to keep up with the new research have moved forward. But somehow, in that forward movement, the old language is hanging on, it's persisting. Our biggest challenge with that is that the old language is very misleading. It reflects a lack of understanding and of what we now know. And it really is very diagnostic as opposed to assessment oriented. So this little tutorial today is all about getting you current. We're going to make you fluently bilingual, whatever your previous iridology language was, and we're going to bring you into the current state of affairs. Now, the holistic world, in the holistic world, if we are not licensed medical practitioners, so if we're not licensed medical doctors, and in some places licensed naturopaths, we have to avoid diagnosing. Right? We are not allowed to name diseases. And that is such an important thing. We are not allowed to name diseases. Additionally, we are not allowed to prescribe. So we can't actually name a cure for a disease. And you know what? That's okay, because the wrong diagnosis means the wrong treatment, right? So if we give what's going on in the body a name and we give it the wrong name, we are likely going to give it the wrong treatment as well. And we know that even the Mayo Clinic, when they do autopsies, they're only right about 50% of the time. And they are a state-of-the-art, leading the world, cutting-edge facility, right? And so we need to be aware that we don't want to ever diagnose or give a disease name. Now, what you're going to notice again as we start into this is that the old language from North American Iridology as taught by Dr. Bernard Jensen, and please do not ever think that I do not respect Dr. Jensen, but the old language that is persisting from what he taught is extremely diagnostic, and that leads to a truckload of problems when we are doing an iris assessment. If you're not already on my mailing list, just a tiny commercial here, I invite you to click on iridology.education. You're going to get one of those little pop-up boxes that will offer you an iridology map that you can download. And if you opt in for that, you'll be added to my email database, which will also then bring you into the loop to let you know when these kinds of trainings are happening. So if you'd love to be in on some free training, then go ahead and go to iridology.education and opt in when that little pop-up box happens. So we're going to look at a lot of iris photos today. And in doing that, we're going to label them based on the old term, but then we're going to also label them based on the new term. So what needs to be remembered is that just as we have new terminology for these things, we also have a new understanding of them. And what that really means is that we now understand, and we don't have time to go into all of the new understandings on every marker we're going to talk about today, but we do understand that what we see in the irides is inherent, not earned. So what we're looking at when we see anything in the eyes is 3 to 4 to 5 generations of genetic inheritance, of inherent predisposition. We know, secondly, that we cannot erase markings from the eyes by cleansing. We cannot move fibers in the eye by changing the way we eat or by taking supplements or by healing anything. And if you were with me on Tuesday, we showed that the eyes don't show that kind of change. We did a really good in-depth case study of 3 broken bones and 2 surgeries and how the eyes did not change at all. So these are things that we know now that we didn't know 60 years ago. Like these are some of the key things, the key ways that iridology has moved forward. All right, so with that little bit of background, you're ready to look at some eyes with me now? If you are, give me a wave, give me a I'm ready, give me a something, let me know you are in with me. All righty. I'm going to call it old school iridology versus constitutional iridology. That's just going to be the simplest way to delineate the 2 types of language we're talking about. For those of you on Instagram, I'm going to move my phone closer to my computer screen so you can see the images better. There you go. So the definite in old school, markings like this were called lesions. They were called lesions. Now, by definition, they said a lesion is a region or organ or tissue which suffered damage or injury through injury or disease, like a wound, an ulcer, an abscess, a tumor. So by definition, we should see a lesion if there's a broken bone, if there is a surgery, if there's anything like that going on, right? And again, on Tuesday, I showed that that doesn't actually happen. It used to be said that these lesions also showed areas of current weakness or degeneration that a person had earned and that needed support. That's the old understanding. We no longer call these lesions. We now call a single one is a lacuna. If we've got more than one, the plural is lacunae. And we now know that these are inherent. They are passed down from generation to generation, and they suggest potential insufficiencies that have been passed down. So we don't see these popping up in a person's eye, but if we have iris photos from the parents and the grandparents, for instance, we can see which parent passed these markings down. If the inherent predisposition to weakness is being resolved or has been resolved, the person has taken really good care of themselves, then they may not pass this on to their offspring. Okay. It's not changing their genetic potential, as it's not changing how the genes manifest in the owner's body, but it may change how the genetics manifest in their offspring's body. We know that the lay of iris fibers, the way these fibers, these threads in the eye are sitting, does not change as a result of trauma. We absolutely know that. Again, did a great case study on that on Tuesday. You can search the Facebook group, Iridology Education, and find it there. A lacuna simply means an unfilled space or gap. A lacuna brings our attention to that reaction field in the iris, but it does not tell us what is inherently wrong there. Depending on where the lacuna is placed in the eye, will give us insight as to an area, an organ, or a tissue in the body that is inherently predisposed to not function quite as well as we would like it to, quite as well as it could if we didn't have the inherent predisposition. A lacuna does suggest an insufficiency that may need support. And again, depending on what the person is or is not doing, and depending on whether there is or is not a personal or family history that corresponds to the symptoms, we will decide whether we need to take action in this area. The next marker we want to look at is this white milky film. Now, depending on how your monitor or your screen is showing this, this may almost look mauve, sort of a light purpley pinky color. This is in old school iridology called a sodium ring or a cholesterol ring. In constitutional iridology, we call this a lipemic diathesis. This is actually not a true iris sign. The lipemic diathesis is actually in the cornea. So let me grab my extra eyeball. When we are looking at an eye, we've got the eyeball, we've got the iris, and there's this bulgy clear membrane at the front. This is called the cornea. It has to be clear or you wouldn't be able to see anything, right? And so, hello, Ashley. So glad you're with me on Instagram. When we look at the cornea, it is continuous with the sclera. And the sclera has a lot of blood vessels in it. If the owner of this eyeball, and we're going to use the eyeball that's on your screen right now, if the owner of this eyeball has some issues with liver enzymes to where they may not be able to process their carbohydrates properly, it can set up issues with the lipids in their blood. So we may see triglyceride issues, we may see cholesterol issues. And often when we see lipids or cholesterol, and even before those are obvious in the bloodstream, we may see that the cornea is absorbing those kinds of things from the nearby bloodstream. And so this is not a guarantee of cholesterol issues. It's not a guarantee of sodium issues. It is more of an indication that the liver enzymes inherently are likely out of balance, might not just be inherent, might be a situational thing where the person has done things to their body where the liver enzymes are out of balance. There is sometimes a correlation between the presence of a lipemic diathesis and hardening of the arteries and senility, but it's not a super strong correlation. The new name, corneal arcus, which includes sort of subnames of corneal annulus, corneal opacity as well, describe instead what the marker looks like. And because we now understand what this marker really is all about, we know we need to trace it back through the liver enzymes and their role in carbohydrate metabolism. We also know that if the liver's not metabolizing carbs properly, it could affect the blood sugars. Okay, so think about all the different ways blood sugar imbalances show up in the body. It can also show up as a lipemic diathesis. There's no way to cleanse or fast or erase the lipemic diathesis, just saying. In old school iridology, we used to call these rings that are going around and around and around like target rings. We used to call them nerve rings or stress rings. And I say we because 30 years ago, 40 years ago to 30 years ago, I was a North American iridologist. When I got that frustrated feeling that this kind of iridology didn't work for me, that's when I was blessed to learn constitutional iridology. And that's where I've stayed for the last 30 years. So when we look at an eye that has all of these rings coming around here, these are not the result of stress. They're not going to go away when the stress goes away. They're not going to go away because you've taken the right B vitamins or because you went and had a massage. They are there and they are stuck there. And Payman, thank you so much for the compliment. I very much appreciate that. He's on Instagram with us and he says that I'm doing a great job of explaining things. Thank you so much. Nice to hear that. And Asma, waving back at you on Instagram. So when we see these kinds of rings in the eye, this is actually an indication that this person was inherently programmed, this is their genetic structure, to live in what we call the sympathetic response zone. We have two choices, our body has two choices when we are, when it's coping with stress. We have the sympathetic response, which is the fight or flight or freeze. It's the blood pressure goes up, the heart rate goes up, you start sweating, you start breathing heavily, you're ready to fight. And we have the parasympathetic, which is the one that brings us down, calms us down, keeps us chill, if you will. When we see people who have lots of these contraction furrows in the eyes, it's because they are genetically programmed to always be ready for the next crisis. These are the people who they actually, in many ways, can make really good first responders because they can think under pressure, right? If this is a person who maybe suffers from anxiety as well, then these contraction furrows are going to tell us that this is going to be a person who is maybe a bit of a drama queen, right? They take a little hangnail and it's a big, big crisis. Asma is asking, is there a recording of this webinar? Great question. Asma, if you join my Facebook group called Iridology Education, you will find the streamed recording will be there. So there you go, Iridology Education on Facebook, ask to join. So when we see these contraction furrows, again, we're not just looking at how many layers are there. We used to think that if there were 3 layers of contraction furrows, the person was either heading into a nervous breakdown or recovering from one. We now know that is not true. These contraction furrows form in utero and are inherently predisposed. So the person is predisposed to responding quickly and sharply to emergencies, right? So their adrenal glands are always just on the edge of being ready to roll. And so when we see these contraction furrows, we know that this is a person who has a very responsive pupil because your pupil responds to stress. The more stress you're under, the bigger the pupil becomes. The bigger the pupil becomes, and if that's a chronic situation, the more contracted or compressed the iris tissue is. The more compressed it is, the more wrinkles form. And the deeper the wrinkles appear. When the pupil gets small again and the iris tissue is stretched out, the contraction furrows don't look as deep. Okay, hopefully that all made sense. So we also, when we're looking at contraction furrows, we need to look at the shape of them because not all of them are round. You'll notice that right here, there's one that has an interesting bend in it. We look to see where are the end points. Do we have a lot of end points? And this eye has so many of them. Oh, here we go. Do we have a lot of end points that kind of line up with each other? Because that teaches us more about how these contraction furrows, where the imbalances and the inefficiencies are, where the person is more likely to experience maybe pain or inflammation or some other kind of imbalance. Are these rings known as determination rings? Asma, I believe they are known as that in another school of iridology, which was called Rayid. Okay, and so right now we are comparing, and because every type of iridology has its own language, we are contrasting old school iridology as taught by Bernard Jensen with current constitutional iridology. In old school iridology, seeing a purplish haze around the edge of the eye, was called venous congestion. And Payman says stress causes the contractions. Not really. It's a predisposition to the adrenal glands wanting to always be ready for the next emergency. So that's the root cause of why these contraction furrows form. Okay, so back to our venous congestion. We now know that this mauve or purplish or sometimes bluish ring that comes around the edge of the iris is not always due to the circulation in the veins being sluggish. It does have to do with circulation, but I have found in my 30 years of practicing constitutional iridology, I have found that haze that's hanging off the edge of the eye actually has a stronger correlation to blood sugar imbalances and tired adrenals. Now, what we know is that both unbalanced blood sugars and tired adrenals can affect the circulation. Okay, so it can affect the circulation, but the indicator isn't there because the circulation is in and of itself the cause. The circulation is the symptom. The blood sugar imbalances and the tired adrenals is the cause. Here we have a few dark lines radiating outwards from the center of the eye. In old school Jensenian iridology, these were called parasite lines. In constitutional iridology, we call them radial furrows. Crossover here, a lot of schools call these radii solaris, and that really does describe what we're looking at. Radii solaris means rays of the sun, so it's things that are radiating outward from the sun like the rays of the sun do, or radiating out from the center of the eye rather, like the rays of the sun radiate out from the center of the sun. And so when we see this though, we're going to stick with the term radial furrows. In old school iridology, it was believed that these indicated that the person had parasites. Right here, right now, they've got parasites, and they would say that they could tell you exactly where the parasites were in your body and even how big they were. What we now know is that is not true, because the irides can only teach us about inherent possibilities. This is so important. The eyes know what your inherent structure is, what your genetic structure is. If something has happened in your body, a virus, a bacteria, a bone break, things like that, they do not change your genetic structure. They may change how that part of the body works for now, but they don't change your genetic structure. And so since parasites don't become a part of our DNA, since parasites don't change our DNA, we cannot pass parasites on to our children through our DNA. We can pass parasites on through other methods, but not through our DNA. That means that we cannot see parasites in the eyes. Radial furrows instead, which is a much more correct name because these are furrows, separations between the fibers that are radiating outwards in the tissue of the eye. These are actually simply separations in the iris fiber. And these separations teach us different things about the nervous system and about how the body works, but they do not reflect parasites. You will see on many, many sites on Facebook and Instagram that things like this, and even the overall color of this eye, are often attributed to heavy metal exposure, to taking lots of sulfa drugs, things like that. And so they're often called drug spots, or they might be called psora. Constitutional iridology, we simply refer to all of this as pigment. Here's the issue I have with the term drug spot or psora. All right. North Americans, and I don't know about those of you who maybe live in Europe or in South America or in the Mideast, but North Americans are cleanse happy. It almost seems to be a big badge of honor to say that I'm full of toxins and I'm doing a cleanse. How much smarter would it be to just make the necessary lifestyle changes to not put trash in the body, and to never have to do a cleanse again. Just asking. Now, having said that, there is absolutely no proof that these signs are the result of drug use, prescription or otherwise, that they are not the result of chemical exposure or of toxicity. Most of the time, these indicators are inherent. They are present from a very early age. We know that all babies' eyes are about the same color when they're born. We know that we see pigment and we see different indicators begin to surface most rapidly in the first 6 months of life. Take a moment and think, is a baby's body fully mature at birth? What do you think? Hello, Valentina. Good to see you on Instagram. So, is a baby's body fully mature at birth? The answer is no. You can't feed a newborn baby steak and potatoes, right? It wouldn't work. A newborn baby's eyes are also not fully mature at birth. The irides are not fully mature at birth. And so because of that, we will continue to see the eyes mature, especially for the first 6 months, a little bit slower till the age of 6. And Asma, thank you for saying no, it isn't. I totally agree with you. And then we'll continue to mature after that, because even at the age of 20, is your body what it's going to be when it's 50? Is it what it's going to be when it's 70? And how much genetic influence is there on what happens in those years? So as we understand that, we then understand that pigment like this is not the result of any kind of medication. It's not the result of illicit drug use, street drugs, for instance. It's not the result of being exposed to lots of chemicals. It is simply the genetics playing out and saying, okay, this is going to surface now. And because we understand what these mean when they do surface, we know what to do with them. So, you know, I've got photos of my children's eyes. This might even be one of them. I don't remember. I have 7 children, so sometimes I even forget their middle names and birth dates. Just saying, right? None of my kids were vaccinated. None of them. They've all been raised on a really clean diet. I mean, they're off on their own now, so, you know, I have no control over what they're doing now. But I did photos of their eyes when they were quite young, and I did them again a couple of years ago when I got a new computer, a new camera rather, and almost all of them have had more of these pigments surface in their eyes, which is very interesting because I have a lot of them in my eyes too. There is no proof anywhere that by doing a cleanse we can get rid of these pigments. The before and after photos that you see on Facebook, where it shows it looks like pigments have faded, are not quite what we think they are. When you see before and after photos, I'm going to ask you to very carefully look at 2 other things. If you can see skin tones, look at the skin tones. And as you look at the iris, compare that as well. We are looking for colors. When we look at a before and after picture, do we see that the skin tones in both photos are the same? Do they match? When we look at the sclera, or the white of the eye, is it the same shade of white from one photo to the next? If those things do not match from one photo to the next, different lighting was used. And if different lighting was used, it will affect the appearance of the color of the eye and the pigments. If brighter light was used, it will make pigments look washed out. It will make the eyes look cleaner. You can even add color filters to wash out things that you want to hide. So I want to really make sure that we understand that these pigments in the eye can't be cleansed out. They are an indicator of things that are being activated, that are activated in the body now, that where that body part may need a little bit of ongoing support, usually through diet and nutrition. When we talk about an absorption ring, now you might be a little bit hard to see this on Instagram because we're going computer to phone. there is a little bit of a gray edge. So we've got a bit of a gray edge. Then we have this ring, which is slightly off-white, and then we get into the blue or grayer shades of the eye. When we look at the absorption ring, we are looking at this gray edge. It is actually not an absorption ring. That's the old school name for it. The correct name for this is actually the gray border or the inner pupillary border. This actually correlates to the stomach lining, and it teaches us about the stomach's inherent ability to secrete digestive juices. It does not teach us about the intestine's ability to absorb anything. It teaches us about the stomach. The rheumatic eye. What a name. Doesn't that make you think this person has rheumatic fever or something like that? Or rheumatism? Well, what we now know is it's really not about rheumatic at all. It's about, we call it febrile. When we see a blue eye that has this much white in it, and it's that really white, which again may not be transmitting really well on Instagram, this suggests that this person is more prone to fevering. You know, if you ask them about their childhood, did you get fevers easily? Was a fever one of the first indicators that you were getting sick? They will always say yes. That's pretty much a guarantee. So this is the febrile eye. And again, it suggests that this is a person whose very first line of defense when their immune system is activated is to throw a fever. And that's a beautiful first line of defense, because throwing an early fever will knock out so many things before we get to other symptoms. Okay, so it's not a bad thing. Might be even a bit of a good thing. Weak constitution is the old name of what we're looking at here in this eye overall. We prefer to call it the connective tissue subtype. How would you feel if you were sitting down with someone who was going to help you with your health and they went, man, you've got a weak constitution? Does that just make you feel like every hope you ever had of feeling good has been shattered? Yeah. So we don't use the term weak constitution because in truth, we only see a predisposition here. In this eye, because we see a lot of gaping of fibers, we see a lot of shading in here. This is what we would call a mildly resilient eye. It's also the connective tissue subtype. As the connective tissue subtype, what that really means is that their collagen structures, the tissue that holds their body together, may not be as resilient and as good at repairing itself and regenerating itself as the next person. So what does that mean? That means that if this person has learned how to care for their body well, they will be able to heal properly. So if this person does the right thing with their foods on a daily basis, they can help their structural tissue, their connective tissue, regenerate very quickly and very adequately. If they don't do that, we know that they will be more prone to sprains and breaks, to getting wrinkles really early in life, to just not having the overall tone of their support tissues that they would like to have. Strong constitution versus neurogenic subtype. Now, strong constitution, what does that mean? Well, in the old vernacular, when we saw an eye like this that had very fine fibers that were very densely packed, with not too much else going on in the tissue, they would say, you've got a strong constitution. But you know what I found over years of doing this? Is a strong constitution doesn't mean good health. This person has actually inherited the neurogenic subtype, which does mean their body is usually quite resilient, but sometimes that resiliency plays against them. Now, why would I say that? I'm going to pop back one slide. When we see someone with an eye like this, and they want help feeling better, they actually usually know a lot of what they need to do because they figured it out very early in life. They figured out that they didn't have a lot of leeway for cheating with their foods. They couldn't drink the fizzy drinks and feel good. They couldn't have the deep fried fatty foods and feel good. You know, depending on where their issues are showing up in their eyes. They learned early on, these are the rules I have to live by if I want to feel good. These people, on the other hand, didn't learn that. These people, typically because their body was so strong and resilient, would party hard. You know, as teenagers, they'd get drunk, they'd smoke pot, they'd smoke cigarettes, they would eat junk food, they would do what all the other teens were doing, and that would carry on into their young adult years. And by the time they're 40 or 50, that good health that their body once had, their body was saying, I can deal with this, I can deal with this, I can deal with this. Body got to a certain point where when I can't deal with this anymore. I mean, show me a little love, will ya? And so suddenly this person is starting to have a ton of symptoms because they were blessed with a really strong body, but they did not take care of it. And so these people, they're a neurogenic subtype, but they typically did not learn how to take care of their body properly. And they need now to get on that bandwagon. They need to be correcting everything they've done wrong for the last 30 or 40 years if they want to enjoy good health going into their golden years. In constitutional iridology, we used to say that little black diamonds like this were an indication of diverticuli and probably bowel cancer. Yeah, diverticuli and bowel cancer is what we used to say in old school iridology. As constitutional iridologists, we now call them crypts. And what we know is that this does suggest that there may be an inherent insufficiency in the body tissue that may be weakening. Do you notice the words may? I'm using the word may a lot. That may be weakening the lining of the intestinal tract. But I don't have X-ray vision, and I don't think you do either. So we don't have the ability to say for sure what's going on. We can often deduce what's going on by asking the client about how many bowel movements do they have, what is their bowel transit time, what is the texture and consistency of the bowel movements, what is the color of the bowel movements. And by ascertaining those things, we can do a pretty good job of ascertaining the overall health of the bowel and the intestinal tract, and deciding from there what action needs to be taken. But we certainly don't tell someone they've got diverticuli. Autonomic nervous wreath versus the collarette. So the autonomic nervous wreath, if you've got any of that old school training, is this ring that comes around here. Also called the ANW, not A and W like the fast food restaurant, but the letters ANW. We call it the collarette. And we do that because, yes, this is about the autonomic nervous system, which encompasses the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. But this also teaches us about the intestinal tract. And if the collarette has any pigment to it, it gives us insight about other organs in the body as well. The placement of this collarette even gives us some indication as to some personality traits that are inherent. Again, this is all inherent. So if we've got someone who's got a collarette that is way, way out here, it teaches us things about their personality, teaches us things about how they assimilate nutrients, but we're never going to be able to give them supplements or anything that's going to move that into here, because that would be changing their genetic inheritance. We can enhance the function of things when that collarette is placed out here, but we're not going to actually move the collarette. And in truth, it doesn't matter that we don't change what the eye looks like, because that's not what we're after. We're using the eye as an assessment tool to understand the body, and we're using that to help us make changes in the diet and in the lifestyle to help the body function better. Ultimately, as constitutional iridologists, we know to not try to change the eyes, because we're not going to be able to. Lymphatic rosary is this ring of stuff coming around the edge. We no longer call it that. We now call it the hydrogenoid subtype, and we call these markers tophi. The lymphatic rosary in old school iridology used to teach that the lymphatic system was totally gummed up. It was totally messed up. Oh my goodness, you've got to do a cleanse. You've got to get all those white blobs out of your eye, because if you don't, that lymphatic system is just such a mess. Oh my goodness. The hydrogenoid subtype instead teaches us that the lymphatic system may be inherently predisposed to being sluggish, but that area also correlates to surface circulation, and the surface circulation may be sluggish. Now, if this, on the other hand, is the eye of a person who is extremely physically active and who is making great food choices, then what this eye teaches is that there is an inherent predisposition towards lymphatic sluggishness, but then we know the person is doing the right things to prevent lymphatic sluggishness. So that's all making sense. Totally different way of looking at things. It's not just about different language, it is about a different understanding. If you've enjoyed this and you really want to dive deep, I'm going to make a last call invitation to you. Here we go. Confident Nutritionist Dynamic Iridology is a course that I teach via live webinar, and it will be starting Wednesday, January 15th, 5 till 7 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Registration is open now at iridology.education/priority, but registration is closing tomorrow, January 11th at 9 p.m. After that, you'll have to wait until the next go round, and we haven't got that scheduled yet. So what is included in the course? Because you've had just a taste, just a tiny taste. You just licked the ice cream cone here. You don't get the rest of the ice cream in this webinar. And that is, you're going to have 20 live 2-hour-long webinars at a value of $23.95. This contains all of the curriculum that you need should you decide that you want to do the International Iridology Practitioner Certification exam. It includes videos of every recording, or of every class. So we actually do videotape every class, and it gets loaded onto your student site. So that's worth another $23.95 Canadian. Michelle Davies, who came to me as a student, and she's completed the course and has certified, came to me already having completed Dr. Doko Purse's course and Dr. Pesik's course. But she said, this is the most amazing iridology course I've taken. Most importantly, it taught her how to put it all together and make a proper assessment, something that had been missed from other things. Thank you, Asma. I'm so glad you're with me. Please stay till the end. Stephanie Morgan, who has a master's degree in education, said that she was trying to teach herself iridology from online. She was doing webinars and things like that, but she found them very confusing and very overwhelming. She told her husband, "This is beyond me. I'm not getting this at all." She found me on internet, and this is what she said: "This person knows how to teach." She has since completed the course and is working on her certification. So what else do you get in the course? So the tuition is $23.95. You get a downloadable digital textbook and downloadable iridology map and a downloadable digital set of cheat sheets. So this is all of your print reference material, all done as downloads. Now I do that because when IPA decides the curriculum needs to be tweaked a little bit, It is so much easier and less expensive to go in and change a digital version and make that available to my students than it is to reprint a hard copy book. You also get in this program $20,000 worth, and that's a lot, of ongoing support and coaching and mentoring well beyond the course. We have a private Facebook group for my students, and we do special office hours tutorial webinars in between classes. And this support goes on long after you finish the course, long after you are certified. This will not end until I quit teaching. And I'm not planning on quitting anytime soon, because if you can't tell, teaching is one of my passions. You get recordings of all of the classes. You get recordings of the individual topics for every lesson. And you also get access to recordings of the last 18 months of the office hours calls. We also provide exam mentoring, all of the IPA exam mentoring as well. And this is all for the tuition. It's all worth $31,000. $31,000. The actual tuition is only $23.95 Canadian. If you would prefer to pay in monthly installments, $529 Canadian. So for those of you in Canada, you're breathing a sigh of relief. Those of you in the US, knock about 30% off this. So when you go to iridology.education/priority and you register on the forms that you're doing online, it's going to show these prices in Canadian dollars. On your credit card company or PayPal or however you're doing this is actually it's just credit card, sorry, is going to automatically convert it to your currency. So if you're in Australia, add about 5% to this because your dollar is a little weaker than ours. If you're in the US, knock about 30% of this because your dollar is stronger than ours. And I apologize for those of you that might be in the UK. I don't remember what the conversion is. I want everyone to remember that on March the 8th, Canada goes on to daylight savings time. That is going to affect your class times a little bit. So for example, if you're in Australia, it's going to change your class time, I believe, to 9 a.m. Okay, so just be aware of that and make sure of your class times. Again, the value of the course is, with tuition, is over $31,000, but your investment is only $23.95 Canadian, or 5 payments of $529. Registration is at iridology.education/priority. And additionally, I only allow 10 students per class. We have a few spots left. I'm anticipating they may fill up by tomorrow night. And so if you are interested, I encourage you to hop on and get yourself registered. What comes next? Hop on over to iridology.education/priority, enter your details and choose the payment plan that works for you. After paying that, you will receive an email that has, you'll receive one email that first off that just says thanks for registering. You'll receive another email that has your enrollment contract. You need to complete that and submit it. Within 1 business day of me receiving that, I will manually complete your registration and will send you an email that has all of the necessary student links so that you can access the student site with the recordings and the textbooks and so on, so that you can access the office hours replays, and so that you can join the Facebook group, and more importantly, so you can actually log on and join us for the live classes. So again, I invite you to hop on over to iridology.education/priority if taking an iridology certification course is where you want to be right now, and if it's the next best move for you. Thanks so much for being with me. I look forward to seeing you in class and online. Have a good day. Bye for now.